She mocked me in front of her friends, but the one I least expected defended me. It's concise, emotionally charged, and immediately sparks curiosity about tension, embarrassment, and unexpected connection. The invitation arrived like a small, fluttering challenge. Elena, the woman I had admired from afar, had asked me to join a casual gathering at her apartment. I told myself it would be simple, just drinks, chatter, laughter. But even as I walked up the steps to her door, my chest tightened with anticipation and a familiar undercurrent of doubt. At 24, I often felt like I was stepping into worlds where age, experience, and confidence mattered more than I had. Tonight, I was stepping into hers. When Elena opened the door, her presence was impossible to ignore. She moved with an ease that seemed effortless, but there was a precision to her gestures, a quiet command of the space around her. She smiled when she saw me, just enough to acknowledge me without lowering the graceful barrier she kept with her friends. There was warmth there, but not indulgence, a balance I couldn't help but notice. Her eyes lingered for a fraction longer than necessary, brushing past me with the faint curiosity of someone who sees you fully, yet cautiously. The apartment was bathed in soft, amber light. The scent of vanilla and citrus mingled with the subtle aroma of red wine and roasted coffee. Elena's friends, all women around her age, circled the living room with easy laughter, their voices overlapping like a familiar melody. I felt the pull of the edges, the quiet invisibility of being the outsider. And yet, as I watched them, I noticed the small details that set each person apart. The way one tucked her hair behind her ear while laughing, the quick flash of painted nails as another gestured animatedly, the tilt of a head that spoke of mischief and confidence. Elena guided the conversation, her voice calm but magnetic, weaving jokes and questions effortlessly. I admired the way her hands caught the light, a bracelet glinting as she gestured, and how her posture radiated confidence without arrogance. Occasionally, her gaze would sweep the room and find mine. Those fleeting moments made my heart skip, not because of romantic expectation, but because I felt seen. Just a flicker, and yet it grounded me more than the chatter around me ever could. I tried to follow the rhythm of the evening, sipping from my glass, laughing when it seemed appropriate, nodding in conversation. But there was a quiet tension I couldn't shake. Every joke, every comment from her friends reminded me that I was younger, less experienced, and slightly out of place in this circle. I felt the heat rising in my neck when I stumbled over my words, the weight of their laughter brushing against me like a soft, accidental sting. And yet, beneath the surface of nervousness, there was fascination. I noticed the way Elena's laughter softened at the edges, how her eyes crinkled in amusement when she truly found something funny. I noticed the grace in her movements, the subtle cues that revealed warmth under her polished exterior. It was these small observations that anchored me, a quiet, growing sense that tonight would be more than just an ordinary evening. Something was shifting, something delicate, unspoken, and yet palpable. By the time the first hour passed, I was caught in a strange blend of admiration and anxiety, feeling both out of place and strangely tethered to Elena's presence. I had no idea that by the end of the evening, a moment of embarrassment would set the stage for an unexpected connection that neither of us could ignore. The laughter started small, just a ripple of amusement, but it quickly grew into a tide that left me feeling exposed. We were sitting in Elena's living room, the amber glow of the lamps casting gentle shadows on the walls. I had thought the conversation was light, easy, the kind of playful banter that comes naturally among friends. But then Elena tilted her head, her eyes catching mine with that spark of mischief I had seen before, and I realized I was about to be the target. "Come on," she said, her voice smooth, teasing, yet just sharp enough to make me wince. "Surely you have some story that's less boring than your usual I read a book yesterday tales." Her friends tittered, the laughter soft but teasing, and I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to laugh along to brush it off, but her words hit a raw nerve. It wasn't just a joke. It was a reminder that I didn't quite belong here, at least not on the same playful footing as them. One of her friends chimed in, leaning back in her chair with a knowing smirk. "Oh, he's so young, isn't he? Not that it's a bad thing, but—" The sentence trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. The room seemed smaller all of a sudden. I forced a smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes, and felt my hands tighten around my glass. I could hear the faint clink of ice against glass, a sound that made my heart jump in the wrong way. Elena laughed, a soft, clear sound, but it carried a sting I hadn't anticipated. Her amusement made the room's attention center on me, and I felt my cheeks flush. I looked down at my hands, noticing the veins standing out slightly, the tension in my fingers, the way my thumb rubbed against my palm without thinking. I wanted to disappear, to retreat into the quiet corner of the room where I could just exist without scrutiny. But even as embarrassment and self-consciousness tightened around me, I couldn't help noticing Elena's subtle body language. She leaned slightly forward when she laughed, the light catching the curve of her cheekbone, the way her hair fell just so over her shoulder. It was almost mesmerizing, maddening, even, that someone could make you feel both humiliated and captivated at the same time. I excused myself, mumbling something about getting some air. The apartment door felt heavier than usual as I stepped outside. The cool night air hit my face, sharp and grounding. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs, letting the quiet of the balcony wrap around me. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled laughter, the echo of my own discomfort lingering like a shadow. It was in that moment of isolation that I realized how delicate the balance of this evening was. One wrong word, one misstep, and the connection I had hoped for with Elena could shatter completely. And yet, even in embarrassment, there was a strange, painful clarity. The evening was far from over, and the story wasn't finished. Someone, was about to shift the rhythm, and I could almost sense it hovering at the edge of the night. The balcony was quiet, a world apart from the warmth and laughter that spilled from Elena's apartment. I leaned against the railing, hands gripping the cool metal, and let the night air wash over me. The sting of embarrassment still pulsed in my chest, a low, persistent ache. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that this was only one evening, one moment, one mistake. But it lingered, clinging to the edges of my confidence. "I thought I'd find you out here." The voice startled me, soft but certain, carrying across the space between us. I turned to see Mara stepping onto the balcony, her presence calm, grounded, yet impossible to ignore. She was slightly older than Elena, maybe 41, with hair pulled loosely back and eyes that seemed to see everything without judgment. The way she smiled, gentle, knowing, made me want to relax, even though my heart was still thudding. Yeah, just needed a bit of air," I muttered, trying to sound nonchalant, failing spectacularly. Mara leaned against the railing beside me, close enough that the faint brush of her arm against mine sent an unexpected warmth through me. "I know," she said softly. "I didn't like how they treated you in there. You didn't deserve it." Her words were simple, but there was weight behind them, a quiet conviction that contrasted sharply with Elena's teasing. The air between us shifted subtly. The city lights below glimmered like distant stars, and the faint hum of traffic was a low, comforting backdrop to her voice. I noticed how her shawl draped over her shoulders, the way it caught the breeze, and the warmth of her presence beside me. There was no pretense in her stance, no performance, only a steady, reassuring reality. It's fine," I said, though my voice wavered. "It's just, I wasn't expecting," my words faltered. Mara's eyes softened, and she placed a hand lightly on my arm, a gesture that was fleeting but charged with an unspoken understanding. The touch wasn't romantic in a bold sense, but it was intimate in a way that made my pulse quicken, my chest tighten. It was the kind of contact that made you feel seen, acknowledged, protected. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, her thumb brushing briefly over my sleeve. "I know." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how small and uncertain I felt, yet simultaneously how grounded I was by her presence. Mara's gaze held mine for just a moment longer than expected, and I felt a connection spark, fragile, delicate, but unmistakable. I realized that tonight, despite everything, I wasn't entirely alone. We stood in silence for several minutes, letting the quiet of the night fill the spaces between words. The laughter from inside seemed distant now, almost irrelevant, as if our little corner of the balcony existed outside the rhythms of the gathering. I felt a subtle relief, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could navigate this world of elegance and wit without losing myself completely. As the night deepened, I knew one thing clearly: Mara had appeared not just as a friend, but as a quiet anchor. And in that moment, I understood that the story of the evening, and perhaps something far more enduring, was only beginning. Mara offered me a ride home without hesitation, and I accepted, grateful for the company, though my nerves buzzed quietly in the back of my mind. The drive began in near silence, a gentle hum of tires against asphalt, and the occasional chirp of distant traffic. The city lights streaked past the windshield, golden and blurry, reflecting faintly in her eyes whenever she glanced my way. We didn't speak immediately. The quiet felt safe, almost comforting, allowing the tension from the earlier incident to ease just a little. I watched Mara's profile in the glow of the dashboard, the soft line of her jaw, the curve of her lips as she breathed, the way her hair caught the light in subtle highlights. She drove with calm precision, her hands relaxed yet purposeful on the wheel. Every so often, a hint of perfume, subtle, warm, and distinctly her, reached me, grounding me in a way that surprised me. Finally, she broke the silence. "I didn't like the way she treated you tonight," she said, her voice low and steady. "You didn't deserve that kind of teasing." Her eyes met mine briefly, conveying sincerity without any need for embellishment. There was a protectiveness in her tone that caught me off guard, and for a moment, I felt both embarrassed and reassured. I didn't expect her to mock me like that," I admitted quietly. "I mean, I thought it was just playful, but—" My words trailed off. Mara didn't interrupt. She simply nodded, her expression gentle, her presence steady. "You handled it well," she said softly. "Most people wouldn't." Her hand brushed mine lightly as she reached to adjust the rearview mirror. It was a fleeting touch, just enough to make my pulse quicken, and yet it carried a quiet reassurance. It wasn't romantic in the obvious sense, but it was intimate, a shared acknowledgement of vulnerability and trust. As we drove, the conversation opened naturally, ebbing and flowing like a calm tide. She asked about my life, my work, my quiet obsessions. I found myself speaking more freely than I had anticipated, drawn out by the way she listened, really listened, without judgment. Her glances were occasional, lingering just long enough to make me aware of her attention, her empathy. The streets grew quieter as we neared my apartment. Rain began to patter lightly against the windshield, adding a rhythm to the drive. The sound was soothing, masking the world outside and leaving just the two of us in the warm cocoon of the car. I watched her fingers on the wheel, the delicate way she adjusted her grip when turning corners, the occasional tilt of her head as she spoke. When we finally pulled up, there was a moment neither of us seemed ready to break. I thanked her quietly, feeling the weight of the evening's events settle in my chest. She offered a faint, knowing smile, one that lingered longer than polite. Her hand brushed mine again as she reached to hand me my coat, and the warmth from that brief contact stayed with me long after I stepped out into the night. I realized then that something had shifted, subtly, quietly, but irrevocably. Mara had appeared in my life not just as a friend, but as someone who understood, who saw the quieter parts of me. And even though tonight had started with embarrassment and tension, it was ending with a delicate, unspoken connection, one that neither of us could ignore. The next day, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. A message from Elena appeared, polite yet hesitant. "I wanted to apologize for last night. I may have gone too far. Can we meet for coffee?" My chest tightened as I read it. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the memory of embarrassment fade quietly. But another quieter part of me, the part that had always admired her, felt compelled to say yes. The cafe was small, tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Soft sunlight filtered through the tall windows, catching the dust motes and lazy streaks. Elena was already there when I arrived, sitting upright with an effortless elegance that still made my pulse quicken. Her posture was perfect, hands folded loosely around a cup of coffee, and her hair caught the light just so, brushing her shoulders in soft waves. "Thank you for coming," she said, her tone careful, almost rehearsed. She smiled, but it was restrained, a practiced warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. I really didn't mean to embarrass you. It's okay, I replied cautiously. I understand it was meant as a joke. My words felt small in comparison to the quiet weight of her gaze. We sipped coffee in tentative silence, the aroma of roasted beans mingling with the faint sweetness of pastries. Just as I began to feel the awkwardness settle into uneasy equilibrium, Mara appeared. She slid into the seat across from me, as if by chance, though the precision of timing made me suspect otherwise. Her presence shifted the room instantly. Calm, grounded, and warm, she carried an energy that contrasted sharply with Elena's careful performance. Elena's smile faltered for a moment, just enough for me to notice. The dynamic between the three of us had subtly changed. Mara's eyes found mine, steady and reassuring, silently conveying, "You're not alone." It was a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. The conversation resumed, light but tinged with undercurrents I couldn't ignore. Elena apologized again, her words sincere, yet I could sense the trace of defensiveness beneath the surface, a desire to maintain control over the situation and her image. Mara spoke little at first, letting Elena speak, but her occasional glances and subtle nods grounded the moment in authenticity. As we talked, I noticed small gestures that spoke louder than any words. Mara brushed a stray hair from her face, her fingers grazing lightly over her cheek. When she laughed at something I said, it wasn't polite, it was warm, genuine. Elena's laughter, while charming, felt more like performance now, as if she were testing the waters rather than simply enjoying them. By the end of the meeting, the tension had softened but not vanished. Elena had offered her apology, and I had accepted it, but the quiet thread that had begun to form between Mara and me was undeniable. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but the warmth of her presence, the gentle weight of her attention, and the steadiness in her gaze left me with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Walking back into the sunlight afterward, I realized the evening's events were far from over. Something new was beginning, a quiet, delicate connection that promised patience, understanding, and the slow unfolding of trust. And I knew that the story between the three of us was only just beginning to reveal its contours. The cafe meeting ended, but I didn't want the evening to conclude yet. Outside, clouds had gathered, and a gentle rain began to fall, soft and persistent, tapping against the pavement in a steady rhythm. Mara suggested we walk for a bit, an umbrella between us, and I followed, grateful for the quiet intimacy the rain offered. The streets glistened, reflecting the amber streetlights and giving the city a dreamlike glow. The air smelled of wet asphalt and faint traces of blooming flowers, a contrast that made the moment feel almost suspended outside of time. Mara held the umbrella so that I was almost entirely shielded, her hand brushing mine briefly when she adjusted her grip. That fleeting contact sent a small, surprising shiver through me, nothing overt, but it anchored me, a subtle reminder that she was here, really present. "I've been meaning to tell you," Mara began, her voice low, almost hesitant. The rain filled the spaces between her words, allowing them to land softly without forcing confrontation. She looked down for a moment, then back at me, and I noticed the vulnerability there, hidden beneath her usual calm composure. "I was angry with Elena last night," she admitted, glancing at me with an honesty that caught me off guard. "Not just because of what she said, but because she forgot how to be kind. How to consider others' feelings. And your reaction, the way you held yourself, it stayed with me." The words made my chest tighten in a mix of surprise and warmth. I opened my mouth, but the rain, the umbrella, the closeness of her presence all made words feel inadequate. Instead, I simply nodded, feeling a subtle shift in the rhythm between us. Mara's eyes softened, and she stepped slightly closer as we navigated a puddle together. Her elbow brushed mine lightly, and the sensation was grounding, intimate, the kind of contact that says more than words ever could. We walked in silence for a while, letting the rain fill the pauses. The sound of droplets hitting the umbrella was steady, almost hypnotic, blending with the faint hum of cars in the distance. I realized then how unusual it was to feel so seen, so understood, by someone I had only known superficially before tonight. Mara wasn't just observing me, she was absorbing me, acknowledging the tension and quiet vulnerability that had clung to me all evening. Finally, she looked at me fully, her gaze steady and searching. I wanted to protect you," she said softly. "Even if you didn't ask for it. And I wanted you to know that someone sees you, really sees you." I felt a rush of something both frightening and exhilarating, the recognition of a connection that was delicate, unspoken, and profoundly stirring. I reached instinctively to steady her elbow again as we stepped over a puddle, and this time, our hands lingered just a second longer. Nothing more than a brush, yet it carried warmth, understanding, and the quiet acknowledgement that this night had shifted everything. As the rain continued to fall around us, I realized that what had begun as embarrassment and tension was transforming into something far more subtle, far more potent. Mara had opened a door, a quiet, emotional intimacy that neither of us could ignore. And in that moment, I understood that this story, our story, was only beginning to reveal its most delicate truths. A week later, Elena hosted another gathering. I wasn't sure what to expect this time. Part of me wondered if last week's embarrassment would repeat itself, or if I'd remain on the periphery of her social circle. But another part of me, quieter and more curious, anticipated seeing Mara again, the steady presence who had transformed the sting of the previous night into something unexpectedly tender. The apartment was warm, bathed in the same golden light that had made last night feel intimate. Laughter and conversation filled the rooms, familiar and inviting. Elena moved through the crowd as always, graceful and confident, yet I sensed a subtle shift. Perhaps she noticed the bond Mara and I had begun to form, or perhaps she simply felt the gentle gravity of the evening itself. Either way, the teasing that had once made my heart race with discomfort was replaced by something lighter, almost playful in a way that felt safe. Mara was there, of course. She spotted me almost immediately and greeted me with a smile that made my chest tighten in the best possible way. There was no grand gesture, no overdone declaration, just the quiet acknowledgement that our connection remained intact, strong in its subtlety. When she walked over, the warmth of her presence enveloped me, as if the noise of the room and the chatter around us had melted away. We moved to a quieter corner of the living room, standing near a shelf of books and framed photographs. The air was infused with the soft scent of vanilla candles and Elena's lingering perfume. Mara leaned slightly closer to me, her shoulder brushing against mine, the faint pressure enough to make my pulse quicken. It was a simple, grounding gesture, a reaffirmation that she was here, present, and aware. Elena approached us, her usual charm in full display, but the dynamic had changed. There was no teasing, no subtle sting in her laughter. She offered polite smiles and engaging conversation, but Mara's calm steadiness seemed to anchor me in a new way. I realized then that the embarrassment of the first evening had given way to something richer, understanding, trust, and a slowly blossoming intimacy. At one point, Mara and I shared a brief, quiet moment near the window. She rested her hand lightly on mine as we moved aside to let someone pass. The contact was fleeting, gentle, yet it carried the weight of unspoken understanding. Her gaze met mine, steady and soft, and in that glance, I felt an unvoiced promise, patience, care, and the slow unfolding of something meaningful. By the end of the evening, as the last guests said their goodbyes and the soft glow of the lamps flickered against the walls, I helped Mara with her coat. Our hands lingered together just a moment longer than necessary, her fingers brushing mine, sending a quiet warmth through me. There was no rush, no grand declaration, only stillness, presence, and the knowledge that this night had quietly reshaped everything. Walking home afterward, I reflected on the journey. Embarrassment had led to understanding, vulnerability had led to connection, and kindness had carved a path toward intimacy. The story hadn't been about instant attraction or dramatic confessions. It had been about noticing, waiting, and allowing emotions to bloom naturally. And in that quiet, golden warmth, I understood that something real, tender, and lasting had begun, and it was just the beginning.